The number you've probably heard, 500,000 dead in Dresden, maybe 1 million, is a fabrication, not an estimate, not a rounding error, a deliberate act of wartime propaganda that outlived the man who invented it by 8 decades, and still circulates on social media today. This is the story of how a number becomes a weapon, and why the real death toll, which was already a catastrophe, wasn't enough. February 1945. The war in Europe is grinding toward its conclusion. Soviet forces are closing in from the east. Allied armies are pressing from the west. Germany is contracting, and its cities are burning. Dresden sits in Saxony, in eastern Germany. By any pre-war measure, it is one of the most architecturally significant cities on the continent. Baroque churches, royal palaces, a skyline that had earned it the nickname, the Florence of the Elbe. By February 1945, it is also severely overcrowded. Its normal population had swelled with refugees fleeing the Soviet advance. Civilians, wounded soldiers, and displaced persons, all compressed into a city whose infrastructure was already under strain. What Dresden was not, by that point in the war, was heavily defended. According to military historians, including Keith Lowe, author of Inferno, the city's anti-aircraft defences had been substantially withdrawn to support other fronts. It had rail infrastructure with genuine military value. It also had approximately 110 war-related industrial facilities, according to historical records. These details matter, not to justify what followed, but to understand the context in which the decision to bomb was made. The raids were ordered and planned. On the night of February 13th, 1945, the first RAF bombers arrived over the city. They would not be the last. What happened over roughly 36 hours, from the evening of February 13th through the afternoon of February 15th, 1945, was 4 separate raid waves conducted by RAF Bomber Command and the United States Army Air Forces. According to the historical record, approximately 3,900 tons of bombs and incendiaries were dropped, high explosive bombs first, to blow out windows and doors, then incendiaries, to ignite what was left exposed. The result was a firestorm. A firestorm is not simply a large fire. It is a specific atmospheric phenomenon. When enough separate fires merge across a sufficient area, they generate their own convection column, a rising column of superheated air that draws oxygen in at ground level from all directions, feeding itself, intensifying. Temperatures in the Dresden firestorm reached approximately 800 degrees Celsius in the most affected areas. That is hot enough to melt glass, hot enough to ignite materials that would not normally combust, hot enough to make the streets themselves dangerous to stand on. But here is the detail that is almost always omitted from popular accounts of Dresden. Approximately 70% of the people who died in Dresden did not die from direct fire. They died from carbon monoxide poisoning and asphyxiation in cellars. This is not a minor technical footnote. It is central to understanding what a firestorm does to human beings. When a firestorm's convection column draws oxygen upward and outward, the air at ground level, and especially underground, is depleted. Cellars that civilians were using as shelters, precisely because they were following civil defense protocols, became sealed environments with failing oxygen levels and rising concentrations of carbon monoxide. Many victims were found with no burns whatsoever. They had simply run out of air. They had done everything right, followed every instruction, and the shelter became the cause of death. In those cellars, across the old city of Dresden, roughly 25,000 people died. We'll come back to that number, because within days of the raid, a different number began circulating. The German military's internal documentation, specifically the document known as Tagesbefehl 47, an order of the day issued by Dresden's military command, recorded a death toll in the range of approximately 20,000 to 25,000. This was the figure derived from the immediate body recovery operations, cross-referenced with what documentation existed. It was a catastrophic number, an atrocity by any standard of measurement. It was not enough for Joseph Goebbels. Goebbels was the Reich Minister of Propaganda. By February 1945, he was operating with the focused desperation of a man who understood that the Reich was losing. His strategic objective was not primarily domestic. The German population already knew the war was going badly. His target audience was the neutral nations, the wavering, and the Allied publics. He needed a narrative. Dresden gave him one. What Goebbels did, according to Ian Kershaw and other historians of the period, was methodologically simple and devastatingly effective. He added a zero. The documented figure of roughly 20,000 became 200,000 in Nazi propaganda releases. In some versions, it climbed further. The mechanism was straightforward. Issue the inflated number to the international press through channels that appeared to be neutral, allow it to propagate before it could be challenged, and use the lag time in wartime communications to entrench the figure. Kershaw described Dresden as, and I'm paraphrasing here, a myth even more horrible than the reality, which was itself already horrible. The strategic purpose was clear. Goebbels wanted to portray the Allied bombing campaign as a war crime of unprecedented scale. He wanted neutral nations to pressure the Allies diplomatically. He wanted Allied civilians to question the morality of their own governments. And to some extent, it worked. The inflated number entered news reports. It was repeated in good faith by journalists who had no way to verify it in the chaos of the final months of the war. The lie was loose in the world. Nazi Germany collapsed in May 1945. Goebbels was dead. The Reich was gone. You might expect the fabricated casualty figure to die with the regime that invented it. It didn't. In the decades after the war, the inflated Dresden death toll found new custodians. Neo-Nazi organizations and Holocaust denial networks adopted the figure, in some cases pushing it even higher to 500,000 or beyond, and began deploying it for a specific ideological purpose. The framing was deliberate. If Dresden could be characterized as a comparable atrocity to the Holocaust, or larger, then the Holocaust itself could be repositioned as one event among many equivalent events. The term some of these groups used was bombing Holocaust. The number Goebbels had invented to serve Nazi wartime propaganda was now being used by people who revered the Nazis. To rehabilitate them. This is the second life of the lie, and it is where the fabricated number does its most persistent damage today. So what is the real figure? In 2004, the city of Dresden commissioned an independent panel of historians to conduct a systematic forensic examination of the casualty record. The commission worked for 6 years. Their methodology was rigorous. They cross-referenced burial records, police casualty logs, hospital admissions and death records, civil defense reports, and physical site analysis. They were not looking for a politically convenient number. They were counting people. The Dresden Historians Commission published its findings in 2010. Approximately 18,000 individual deaths could be confirmed and documented. The Commission's maximum credible estimate, accounting for undocumented deaths, incomplete records, and the chaos of wartime record-keeping, was approximately 25,000. Not 200,000, not 500,000, not 1 million, approximately 25,000. Each of those 25,000 was a real person. Many of them are named in the historical record. They were civilians, refugees, patients in hospitals, people sheltering in cellars, following the instructions they had been given. Their deaths were real, documented, and constitute a genuine wartime atrocity by any honest standard of judgment. The inflation, every ghost added above that real number, does not honor them. It erases them. It dissolves 25,000 individual human beings into an anonymous crowd of invented millions, where they serve a propaganda purpose rather than a historical memory. The lie does not make Dresden more terrible. It makes the real dead harder to see. The Dresden Historians Commission spent years counting the real dead. They found approximately 25,000. Every one of them was real. Every inflated ghost added above that number serves propaganda, not memory. The question worth sitting with is this: when a false casualty figure is this persistent, when it survives the regime that invented it, when it migrates from Nazi wartime propaganda into post-war neo-Nazi revisionism, when it still appears in social media threads in 2024, who keeps it alive? And what does keeping it alive accomplish? Dresden was a genuine atrocity. It requires no inflation. The 25,000 real dead deserve accurate memory, not a crowd of invented millions conscripted into someone else's ideology. If this kind of forensic look at historical myth interests you, there's more on the channel. And if you found this useful, share it. The correction travels slower than the lie. It needs the help.